The twin suns beat down mercilessly on the rusted spires of Morazan, a dying desert world at the edge of the spiral dominion. Heat waves shimmered across the cracked earth, distorting the silhouettes of the abandoned market towers that pierced the amber sky. Beneath this desolate surface, in the cool darkness of the salvage tunnels, Eli Navarro adjusted his worn leather gloves and wiped sweat from his brow. Another day, another scavenge, just like the thousands before it. Eli's calloused fingers moved with practiced precision across the exposed circuitry of a fallen security drone. The Empire had left so much behind when they'd pulled their main forces back to the Central Worlds. A treasure trove for those who knew what to look for. And Eli Navarro knew exactly what to look for. Power coupling still intact, he muttered to himself, his voice echoing in the empty tunnel. Navigation array shot, but the neural processor. He pried open a small compartment in the drone's fractured skull, revealing a glimmering blue chip. Perfect. He slipped the processor into one of the many pouches hanging from his utility belt. That alone would fetch enough credits at the outpost to keep him fed for a week. Not a bad haul for a morning's work. The distant drone of a marketplace announcer filtered down through a grate above him. The words distorted, but the tone unmistakable. Warnings of Imperial activity in the outer sectors. Soul hunters, they called them now. Elite troops engineered for a single purpose: to track, capture, and reclaim Imperial property, especially the living kind. Eli had heard the rumors. Everyone had. The Empire didn't like losing their investments, particularly their bioengineered stock. But it wasn't his problem. He'd learned long ago that survival meant minding your own business and avoiding Imperial entanglements at all costs. He shouldered his pack and moved deeper into the tunnels, his headlamp cutting a narrow path through the darkness. This section of the underground network had once been a transit system before the water wars had rendered the surface nearly uninhabitable. Now it was a labyrinth of forgotten technology and broken dreams, and Eli's personal hunting ground. The crackle of his radiation detector warned him away from a collapsed section to his right. Instead, he veered left, following a promising trail of debris that suggested an untouched maintenance bay might lie ahead. But, as he rounded the corner, a sound froze him in place. A sound that didn't belong in these dead tunnels. A faint, mewling cry, like an infant in distress. Eli's first instinct was to turn around. Other scavengers sometimes set traps, using recordings to lure the curious or kind-hearted into ambushes. But something about the quality of the sound, its desperate, faltering nature, seemed too authentic to be fabricated. Probably just a trapped desert kit, he told himself, even as his feet carried him toward the source. The cry led him to a narrow side passage he'd never explored before. As he ducked through the low archway, his headlamp illuminated a scene that stopped his heart. In a makeshift nest of discarded packing foam and torn fabric lay what could only be described as an alien child. Its skin was the pale blue of a morning sky, with faint, silver markings that seemed to pulse with its labored breathing. Tiny fingers, 6 on each hand, clutched weakly at a tangle of bio-wiring that connected the infant to a failing power node embedded in the wall. Beside the child lay the crumpled form of an adult of the same species. Female, Eli guessed, based on the more elaborate markings that swirled across her exposed shoulders and the delicate structure of her face. Her eyes, large, without pupils, and the deep purple of twilight, fluttered open at his approach. "Please," she whispered, her translator collar producing the word with a slight mechanical delay. "Help us." Eli stood frozen, his scavenger's caution warring with basic human compassion. The woman was clearly injured, a deep gash across her abdomen crusted with dried fluid the color of mercury. The child seemed worse off, its breathing irregular, its bio-wiring sparking dangerously as the power node fluctuated. "I'm not a medic," Eli said, already backing away. "There's an outpost 2 clicks east that might—" "No!" The woman's voice strengthened with desperation. "They'll find us. The hunters. They track her signature." She gestured weakly to the infant. "My daughter is dying. The life support is failing." Eli glanced at the power node. It was Imperial tech, designed to interface with bioengineered life forms. He'd never worked on one before, but the principle couldn't be that different from the drones he'd stripped 100 times. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, despite his better judgment. "Her neural pathways are destabilizing. She needs recalibration. The connectors." The woman's voice faded as she slipped toward unconsciousness. With a reluctant sigh, Eli set down his pack and knelt beside the child. The bio-wiring was a mess of crossed connections and emergency splices, the work of someone desperate and untrained. But the base technology was familiar enough. "I don't even know why I'm doing this," he muttered as he pulled out his multi-tool and a portable diagnostic scanner. The woman's eyes flew open again as he prepared to work. She reached out, her 6-fingered hand grasping his wrist with surprising strength. "Save my baby, human," she pleaded, her purple eyes luminous with tears. "And I'll be yours forever." The raw desperation in her voice sent an uncomfortable jolt through Eli. He gently removed her hand from his wrist. "Let's just focus on stabilizing her," he said gruffly. The next 30 minutes were a tense blur of improvised electronics work. Eli discovered that the child's neural interface, a series of bioorganic connectors linked to her central nervous system, had begun to degrade. The power node was meant to regulate her brain functions, while the connectors healed. But the node itself was damaged, sending erratic pulses that were doing more harm than good. Working with the precision that had kept him alive for 15 years as a scavenger, Eli rewired the setup, bypassing the damaged sections of the node and creating a stable circuit using components from his own supplies. The child's cries subsided as the connection stabilized, her breathing becoming more regular. "There," Eli said, sitting back on his heels. "That should hold for a while, but she needs proper medical attention. This is just a patch job." The woman had been watching him work, her eyes never leaving his hands. Now she pushed herself up to a sitting position, wincing with the effort. "My name is Varen," she said formally. "This is my daughter, Mira. We are in your debt, human." Eli Navarro." He began repacking his tools. "And, like I said, this is temporary. You need to get to a medical facility." "We cannot." Varen's tone was flat, brooking no argument. "The Empire wants her back." "Back?" Eli frowned. "What do you mean, back? She's just a baby." Varen's gaze dropped to her daughter, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "She is considered Imperial property, a failed experiment." Before Eli could ask what she meant, the unmistakable sound of scavenger boots echoed from the main tunnel. Multiple sets, moving quickly. "Someone's coming," Eli whispered, reaching for his blaster. Varen's expression hardened. "They must have tracked the power surge when you repaired the connections." Eli cursed under his breath. Of course, any significant electrical activity in these dead tunnels would stand out like a beacon to the right scanning equipment. Amateur mistake. He peered around the archway and spotted 3 figures moving toward their position. Local scavengers. Not Imperial troops. But that was small comfort. Territorialism ran strong in the tunnels, and outsiders were rarely welcomed. "We need to move," Eli decided. "Can you walk?" Varen nodded grimly. "I can manage." "Then grab your daughter and follow me. There's a maintenance shaft about 50 meters back that connects to a lower level. We can lose them there." As Varen carefully disconnected Mira from the makeshift life support, the child now stable enough to survive without it for a short time, Eli quickly gathered his equipment. They slipped out of the alcove, just as the lead scavenger rounded the corner. "Hey! This is Draken territory!" the man shouted. raising a rusted plasma cutter that had been converted into a crude weapon. Eli didn't bother responding. He pushed Varen ahead of him and fired a warning shot from his blaster, forcing their pursuers to take cover. Then they ran, ducking through narrow passages and scrambling over fallen debris, the angry shouts of the scavengers fading behind them. They reached the maintenance shaft, a tight vertical tube with rusted service ladders bolted to the sides, and Eli helped Varen secure Mira to her chest with strips torn from his spare shirt. The baby remained mercifully quiet, her silver markings now pulsing with a stronger, steadier rhythm. "Ladies first," Eli said, gesturing to the ladder. Varen gave him a look that might have been gratitude or might have been resignation before starting her descent. Eli followed, pulling the access hatch closed behind them just as the sounds of pursuit grew louder again. The lower level was older, dating back to before the Empire had even reached this sector. The air was stale but breathable, the darkness nearly absolute until Eli activated his headlamp. The beam revealed a vast, cathedral-like space, an ancient station platform, long abandoned. "We should be safe here for a while," Eli said, setting down his pack and extracting a portable heater. The temperature this far below the surface was significantly cooler. "Now, you want to tell me what's really going on?" Varen settled on a broken bench, cradling Mira against her chest. In the harsh light of Eli's lamp, her injuries looked worse, not just the abdominal wound, but dozens of smaller cuts and bruises marring her blue skin. "I was a royal life breeder," she said finally, the words coming reluctantly. "One of thousands engineered to produce soldiers for the Dominion's expansion." Eli had heard of the breeding programs, rumors, mostly, whispered in the darker corners of outpost bars. The Empire's need for troops had outpaced normal reproduction rates, leading to the development of accelerated gestation techniques and specialized mothers designed for the task. "The children we produce are supposed to be perfect," Varen continued, her voice hollow. "Emotionless, obedient, ready for neural implantation and combat programming by their third cycle." She looked down at Mira, her expression softening. "But sometimes there are defects." "Defects?" Eli echoed. "Emotions, individual personalities, free will." Varen traced a finger along the silver markings on Mira's tiny forehead. "These patterns indicate emotional capacity. In a normal Imperial soldier, they would be uniform, regulated. In Mira, they fluctuate with her feelings. She feels joy, fear, love, everything they try to breed out of our children." Eli absorbed this information slowly. "So they want her back to... what? Fix her?" Varen's purple eyes hardened. "To terminate the defect, to study what went wrong in my genetic line, to make sure it never happens again." The implications settled like a cold weight in Eli's stomach. "And you? What do they want with you? Breeders who produced effective offspring are reconditioned." Her hand unconsciously moved to the wound on her abdomen. "I would be wiped and reprogrammed, then put back into production." Eli swore softly. "How did you escape?" "One of the medical technicians had developed an attachment to me over the years. He falsified Mira's termination records and helped us flee on a supply transport." A shadow passed over her face. "He paid with his life." The distant sound of a drone's propulsion system echoed through the vast space, interrupting their conversation. Eli's head snapped up, his hand moving automatically to his blaster. "Imperial?" Varen whispered, clutching Mira tighter. Eli nodded grimly. "Those scavengers must have called it in. The Empire pays bounties for recovered property." He quickly gathered his gear, mind racing through their limited options. The station had multiple exits, but most would likely be monitored if Imperial forces were now involved. They needed a diversion. "I've got an idea," he said, digging through his pack. "But we need to move fast." From the depths of his bag, Eli produced a small, cylindrical device with exposed wiring, a makeshift EMP disruptor he'd been saving for emergencies. It wouldn't stop the drones completely, but it might confuse their tracking systems long enough for an escape. "This way," he urged, leading Varen toward a narrow service corridor half hidden behind a collapsed ticket booth. They had barely made it 20 meters when the distinctive whine of a Soul Hunter squad echoed from the platform behind them. Unlike the mindless drones, Soul Hunters were elite soldiers, cyborgs with enhanced tracking capabilities and a single-minded determination that made them the Empire's most feared recovery agents. "Run!" Eli hissed, pushing Varen ahead of him. They sprinted through the corridor, which opened into an even older section of the transit system, a collapsed metro shaft where the ceiling had partially given way, allowing a thin shaft of dusty sunlight to penetrate the gloom. The debris created a natural ramp, leading up toward what might be an exit to the surface. But before they could reach it, two armored drones descended through the light shaft, their weapon systems powering up with an ominous hum. Behind them, the heavy footsteps of the Soul Hunters grew louder. They were cornered. Eli's mind raced. The drones would be linked to the Hunters, sharing targeting data and movement predictions. If he could disrupt that link... "Cover her eyes," he told Varen, gesturing to Mira. As Varen shielded her daughter's face, Eli activated the EMP disruptor and hurled it toward the ceiling where the drones hovered. The device detonated with a sharp crack, sending a pulse of electromagnetic energy outward. The drones shuddered in midair, their systems momentarily scrambled. Taking advantage of the confusion, Eli fired his blaster at the weakened section of ceiling. Chunks of concrete and metal rained down, temporarily blocking the corridor behind them and disabling one of the drones completely. The other recovered quickly, its targeting systems locking onto Varen. "No!" Eli shouted, throwing himself between the drone and Varen. He fired 3 rapid shots, the first 2 missing in his haste, but the third connecting with the drone's central processor. It dropped from the air, crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. But the victory was short-lived. From the other side of the debris pile came the sound of the Soul Hunters beginning to clear a path. They had minutes at most. "Up there," Eli pointed to where the light shaft widened near the surface. "If we can reach that opening, we might be able to lose them in the market district." Varen looked up, then back at Eli, her expression resolute. "Take her," she said, offering Mira to him. "I'll hold them off." "What? No." "I can interface with the remaining Imperial tech in this area," Varen insisted. "Create false signatures, confuse their trackers, but not while carrying her." Her purple eyes bored into his. "Save my baby, Eli Navarro. Take her somewhere safe." For a moment, Eli was tempted. It would be easier to escape with just the child. But the thought of leaving Varen to face the Soul Hunters alone... "That's not happening," he said firmly. "We stay together." He scanned their surroundings, desperate for another option. His gaze landed on the fallen drone, its power core still glowing faintly. "I have another idea." Working quickly, Eli salvaged the drone's magnetic coils and power cell, combining them with components from his own kit to create a crude but powerful electromagnetic pulse generator. Unlike his smaller disruptor, this one would affect a much larger area and would completely drain the power cell, their only source of energy for Mira's eventual reconnection to life support. It was a gamble, but they had no choice. "When I activate this, every piece of Imperial tech in a 50-meter radius is going to shut down," he explained, "including any neural augmentation the Soul Hunters have. It'll buy us maybe 2 minutes before their backup systems engage." Varen nodded her understanding. Eli positioned the device near the debris pile, set the timer for 30 seconds, and then led Varen toward the light shaft. They had just begun to climb the precarious ramp of rubble when the first armored glove of a Soul Hunter punched through the barrier. "Now!" Eli triggered the device remotely. A massive pulse of energy radiated outward, followed by the satisfying sound of Imperial equipment shorting out on the other side of the barrier. The hand protruding through the debris went limp. Taking advantage of the momentary reprieve, they scrambled up the ramp, Eli helping Varen navigate the treacherous footing while she protected Mira. They reached the surface just as angry shouts from below indicated the hunters were beginning to recover. They emerged into the blinding sunlight of late afternoon, finding themselves in a forgotten maintenance yard on the outskirts of the market district. Without stopping to get their bearings, they ran, weaving through the maze of abandoned vehicles and storage containers until they reached a crowded thoroughfare where they could blend with the flow of merchants and customers. "We need to get off planet," Eli said as they ducked into the relative safety of a crowded food stall. "They'll have the entire sector on alert now." Varen looked down at Mira, who had begun to show signs of distress. The silver markings on her forehead were pulsing erratically again. "She needs life support soon. The neural pathways are still healing." Eli's mind raced through their options. The outpost was out of the question now. It would be the first place the Empire would look. They needed somewhere quiet, isolated, with access to power that he could adapt for Mira's needs. "I know a place," he said finally. "It's not comfortable, but it should be safe for a while." The abandoned moon station hung in low orbit around Morazan, a relic from the early days of Imperial expansion. Once a thriving waypoint for transport ships, it had been rendered obsolete when the Empire constructed the massive Nexus hub in the neighboring system. Now it drifted, forgotten, visited only occasionally by the most desperate scavengers, or by those who needed to disappear. Eli had discovered it years ago, and had gradually established a small hideout in one of the more intact sections. Emergency power still functioned in the parts of the station, drawing energy from aging solar collectors. It wasn't much, but it would be enough for what they needed. Getting there was the challenge. The only regular transport to the station had stopped running decades ago. Their best option was to hire a private shuttle, but that required money Eli didn't have, and would create a trail the Empire could follow. "There's someone who might help," he said reluctantly. "But she doesn't come cheap." Rika's chop shop occupied an innocuous warehouse near the spaceport. Its exterior, deliberately dilapidated to discourage casual visitors. Inside, however, was a bustling operation where stolen ships were stripped, modified, and resold to buyers who didn't ask questions about provenance. The half-alien smuggler herself sat atop a stack of crates, her mismatched eyes, one human brown, one alien gold, watching Eli with amused interest as he explained their situation. Her skin had the faint green tinge of her mother's species, though she kept her human father's features hidden behind an elaborate mask of circuitry and metal. "So let me get this straight," Rika said, tapping a mechanical finger against her chin. "You want me to risk my operation smuggling Imperial fugitives, a breeder, and a defective infant, no less, to that death trap of a station, all because you suddenly developed a conscience?" Eli met her gaze steadily. "That's about the size of it." Rika laughed, the sound harsh and metallic through her respirator. "You're either braver or stupider than I thought, Navarro." She hopped down from her perch, circling Varen with undisguised curiosity. "Though I have to admit, I've never seen a royal breeder up close before. They usually keep your kind locked up tight in the inner worlds." Varen stiffened but remained silent, her arms protectively around Mira. "What's your price?" Eli asked, cutting to the chase. Rika's artificial eye whirred as it focused on him. "Information." "What kind of information?" "I know you've been mapping the old mining sectors beyond the rift," she said. "I want the data chip with the untapped pre-war mineral fields you discovered last season." Eli frowned. Those coordinates were his insurance policy, unexplored territory rich with rare minerals that could set him up for life if he ever saved enough for his own mining equipment. "That's worth 10 times a simple shuttle ride." Rika shrugged. "Then I guess the Empire gets their property back." Before Eli could respond, Varen stepped forward, "We'll find another way," she said quietly. "Thank you for your time." Something in her dignity seemed to give Rika pause. The smuggler studied her for a long moment, then sighed dramatically. "Fine. The chip buys you passage and my silence. Plus, I'll throw in some basic supplies." She pointed a warning finger at Eli. "But if you get caught, you never heard of me. Got it?" Relief flooded through Eli. He reached into an inner pocket of his jacket and produced a small data chip, its casing scratched and worn, but the contents intact. His future, traded for theirs. Deal. The journey to the moon station was tense but mercifully brief. Rika's shuttle, a modified Imperial scout craft with the identifying markers carefully removed, slipped past the planet's automated detection systems with practiced ease. Within an hour, they were docking at one of the station's emergency airlocks, far from the main hub where scavengers occasionally made camp. "Home sweet home," Eli said as he helped Varen through the airlock. The artificial gravity was functioning at minimal levels, creating a disconcerting lightness to their movements. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dim blue glow. He led them through a series of corridors to a section he had partially restored over the years. The main chamber had once been a rec room for station personnel, its large observation window offering a spectacular view of Morazan below and the distant stars beyond. Eli had cobbled together basic furnishings: a sleeping pallet, a cooking unit, storage containers filled with supplies. "It's not much," he admitted, "but the power is stable and we're off Imperial radar." Varen looked around, taking in the quiet solitude of the place. "It's perfect," she said softly. Eli busied himself setting up a makeshift life support system for Mira, adapting the station's power output to match the requirements of her neural interface. It took several hours of careful work, but by the time Morazan's twin suns had set in the view below, the infant was connected to a stable power source, her silver markings once again pulsing with a regular rhythm. "She's doing better," Varen observed, her finger gently tracing the patterns on her daughter's forehead. "The pathways are healing." Eli nodded, allowing himself a small smile of satisfaction. "The system should hold now. I've rigged it with backup power in case the main grid fluctuates." He realized suddenly how exhausted he was. The day's events, from his routine scavenging to their desperate escape, had drained him completely. He slumped into a chair, rubbing his face with grimy hands. "You should rest," Varen said, noticing his fatigue. "I can watch over Mira." Eli meant to protest, but the thought of sleep was too tempting. He nodded, dragging himself to the sleeping pallet in the corner. "Wake me if anything changes," he mumbled, before dropping into a deep, dreamless slumber. He awoke to the sound of soft singing. The melody was strange, with harmonic shifts that no human voice could produce. Yet it was undeniably beautiful. Eli lay still, eyes closed, listening as Varen's voice wove an alien lullaby around the quiet chamber. When the song ended, he opened his eyes to find her sitting by the observation window. Mira cradled in her arms. The infant was awake, her tiny six-fingered hands reaching up toward her mother's face. "That was beautiful," Eli said, sitting up. Varen looked over, a hint of embarrassment crossing her features. "It is a forbidden song. Breeders are not supposed to form emotional attachments to their offspring. But my own mother sang it to me, before she was reconditioned." Eli moved to join them by the window. Below, Morazan turned slowly, its desert surface glowing amber in the light of the rising suns. "You remember your mother?" Varen nodded. "Fragments only. I was very young when they took her away. But I remember her songs." She looked down at Mira. "I want my daughter to have more than fragments." The simple statement carried the weight of a revolution, a defiance of everything the Empire had designed her to be. Eli felt a strange tightness in his chest as he watched mother and daughter silhouetted against the stars. "She will," he promised. The days that followed established a routine of sorts. Eli worked on strengthening their security, rigging sensor alerts that would warn them of any approaching vessels. He also focused on Mira's life support, gradually weaning her off the constant power as her neural pathways stabilized. Varen, meanwhile, explored the station, discovering hydroponics bays that could be restored to grow simple foods, and storage rooms with usable supplies. They existed in a strange bubble, removed from the dangers that had driven them there, yet always aware of the precarious nature of their sanctuary. Eli found himself watching Varen with increasing fascination. She was unlike anyone he had ever met, a woman created for a singular purpose, who had somehow broken free of her programming to become something entirely her own. One night, as they shared a simple meal of reconstituted rations, Eli found himself asking the question that had been nagging at him since they met. "What did you mean when you said you'd be mine forever?" Back in the tunnels, Varen set down her food, her expression carefully neutral. "Breeders are taught that our bodies are currency. Our value lies in what we can provide to others." She met his gaze directly. "I was offering the only thing I believed had worth." The implications made Eli deeply uncomfortable. "That's not. I wouldn't—" "I know that now," she interrupted gently. "You've shown me that help can come without such costs. It is a new concept for me." Eli wanted to say more, to express his outrage at a system that had reduced her to property, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he reached across the table and briefly squeezed her hand. The gesture seemed inadequate, but Varen's expression softened at the touch. In the days that followed, they continued to work on the station, gradually transforming it from a temporary hideout to something resembling a home. Eli showed Varen how to repair basic systems. She taught him words in her native language. As Mira grew stronger, requiring less and less support from the makeshift medical equipment, her personality began to emerge, curious, stubborn, with a laugh that echoed through the empty corridors like music. Eli found himself becoming attached to the infant in ways he'd never expected. He had always avoided entanglements, relationships, anything that might slow him down or make him vulnerable. But Mira's tiny hands reaching for him when he entered a room, her delighted coos when he made silly faces, these things were cracking open a part of his heart he'd long thought deadened. And then there was Varen. Their initial caution around each other had gradually given way to a comfortable companionship, and then to something deeper. Eli caught himself watching her when she wasn't looking, admiring the grace with which she moved in the low gravity, the intelligence in her purple eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through unimaginable hardship. One evening, as they stood before the observation window, watching a meteor shower streak across Morazan's atmosphere, Varen turned to him with an unexpected question. "Do you regret helping us?" Eli considered the question seriously. His old life had been solitary but safe. He'd had plans, ambitions. The mineral fields he'd traded away might have eventually bought him passage to the Central Worlds, where technology commanded premium prices. Instead, he was a fugitive, hiding on an abandoned station with two aliens who were considered property by the most powerful force in the sector. "No," he said finally, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I don't regret it." Varen studied his face in the starlight, her expression unreadable. Then, with a hesitancy that spoke volumes, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against his, an intimate gesture among her people. He would later learn. "Then I am glad you found us," she whispered. The moment was interrupted by a sharp alert from the security system Eli had rigged. Someone had docked at the main hub. "Imperial?" Varen asked, fear instantly replacing the warmth in her eyes. Eli checked the readings. "No, looks like scavengers. Probably just looking for easy pickings." He gathered his blaster and a portable scanner. I'll check it out. Stay here and keep Mira quiet." He moved silently through the darkened corridors, using his knowledge of the station's layout to approach the main hub undetected. The scanner confirmed 3 life forms, human, judging by the readings, moving carelessly through the abandoned command center, their voices echoing as they argued over which sections might still contain valuable technology. Eli was about to retreat, satisfied they posed no immediate threat, when he heard a name that stopped him cold. "Looking for some breeder female and her spawn. Rika says they might be hiding out here." Eli's blood ran cold. Rika had betrayed them, whether pressured by the Empire or simply offered a better price. She had given away their location. He slipped back to their quarters, mind racing. It was only a matter of time before the scavengers found them, or worse, reported back to Imperial forces. They needed to leave, immediately. "We've been compromised," he told Varen, who was already packing essential supplies, having sensed the urgency in his return. "Rika sold us out." Varen's expression hardened, but she showed no surprise. "Where can we go?" Eli considered their options. The scavengers had arrived in a short-range transport, not suitable for interplanetary travel, but it might get them to the surface of Morazan, where they could lose themselves in the sprawling refugee settlements of the southern continent. "We take their ship," he decided. "It's risky, but it's our only choice." They moved quickly, gathering only what they absolutely needed. Mira, now fully disconnected from life support, was wrapped in thermal blankets and secured to Varen's chest. Eli armed himself with his blaster and a makeshift stun grenade he'd assembled from station components. Their path to the main hub required them to navigate service tunnels that ran parallel to the main corridors, cramped, uncomfortable spaces filled with pipes and wiring. Eli led the way, using his scanner to track the scavengers' movements and avoid detection. They had nearly reached the docking bay when disaster struck. Mira, perhaps sensing the tension or uncomfortable in her wrappings, let out a piercing wail. The sound echoed through the metal walls of the service tunnel. "Over there!" a gruff voice shouted from the corridor beyond. "In the walls!" "Run!" Eli urged, abandoning stealth for speed. They burst from the service tunnel into the docking bay, just as the scavengers rounded the corner behind them. Weapons raised. Eli pushed Varen toward the transport ship, turning to provide covering fire. "Get her on board, I'll hold them off." The first scavenger dropped with a clean shot to the leg, his screams echoing in the cavernous bay. The second dove for cover behind a stack of crates. The third, more cautious, hung back at the entrance, calling for reinforcements on a comm unit that made Eli's heart sink. The device had Imperial markings. Not just scavengers then, bounty hunters. Eli fired again, forcing the second man back as Varen worked to override the transport security systems. Her fingers flew over the control panel with surprising skill, another benefit of her Imperial programming. Perhaps. "Almost there," she called, as the ship's engines began to hum to life. The third bounty hunter had disappeared, circling around to approach from another entrance. Eli spotted him too late. The man had a clear shot at Varen's exposed back as she worked on the ship. Without thinking, Eli threw himself into the line of fire. The bounty hunter's blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his blaster skittering across the floor. Pain exploded through his body, but he remained conscious, gritting his teeth against the agony. The bounty hunter approached, weapon trained on Eli's chest. "Nothing personal," the man said with a shrug. "Just business." Before he could fire again, a blur of blue motion struck him from behind. Varen, moving with unexpected speed and precision, had leapt from the ship's ramp. Her hands found the pressure points at the base of the man's neck, a technique developed for breeders to subdue unruly offspring that she had never thought to use in violence. The bounty hunter crumpled, unconscious. "Eli!" She was at his side in an instant, examining the wound with clinical efficiency. "Can you walk?" He nodded through the pain, allowing her to help him to his feet. "The ship?" "Ready. Mira is secured." They stumbled up the ramp together as the second bounty hunter emerged from cover, firing wildly. The shots went wide, striking the hull with harmless sparks as the ramp closed behind them. Inside the cramped cockpit, Varen guided Eli to the co-pilot's seat before taking the controls herself. Her hands moved with confident precision over the unfamiliar console. "You know how to fly this thing?" Eli asked through gritted teeth, trying to stem the bleeding from his shoulder. "All breeders are given basic pilot training in case of emergency evacuations," she replied, her focus on the launch sequence. "Hold on." The transport shuddered as it detached from the docking clamps, then shot forward into the void. Behind them, the station receded, their brief sanctuary already lost to them. Varen set a course for the southern continent of Morazan, plotting a trajectory that would mask their approach from standard Imperial sensors. As the autopilot engaged, she turned her attention to Eli's wound. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her, though the searing pain suggested otherwise. Varen's expression was skeptical as she carefully removed his jacket to expose the injury. The blast had burned through flesh and muscle, leaving a charred crater just below his collarbone. She found a medkit in the ship's emergency supplies and set to work cleaning and bandaging the wound. "You saved my life," she said quietly as she worked. "Again." Eli tried to shrug, then winced at the movement. "You saved mine too. We're even—" A small sound from the makeshift carrier drew their attention to Mira, who was watching them with curious purple eyes, seemingly unfazed by their hasty escape. "She's resilient," Eli observed. "Like her mother." Varen's fingers paused in their ministrations, her gaze meeting his. "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" It was the question Eli had been avoiding. Their options were limited. The Empire's reach extended to nearly every developed world in the sector. The frontier planets were lawless and dangerous. Nowhere seemed truly safe. "I know a place," he said finally. "A small moon in the outer rim, terraformed centuries ago, but abandoned during the resource wars. Remote, self-sufficient if you know how to work the land. The Empire doesn't bother with it. No strategic value." "You've been there?" Eli nodded. "Once, on a long-haul scavenging run. Been saving the coordinates as a backup plan if things ever got too hot on Morazan." He gestured to his utility belt, hanging nearby. "There's a data chip in the left pocket with the navigation codes." As Varen retrieved the chip, her fingers brushed against something else, a small, metallic object with familiar markings. She pulled it out, eyes widening in recognition. "This is an Imperial officer's insignia. Where did you get this?" Eli's expression clouded. "It was my father's. He was a logistics officer before the Water Wars. Stayed loyal to the Empire even after they abandoned our colony to die." Bitterness crept into his voice. "He gave it to me before he left to rejoin his unit. Said he'd come back for us once the fighting died down." "He never returned," Varen guessed softly. "No. My mother and I survived by scavenging the ruins. She taught me everything I know about mechanical systems before she died." He took the insignia from Varen's hand, studying it for a moment before returning it to the pocket. "I keep it to remind myself that loyalty to the Empire is a one-way street." Varen said nothing, but her hand found his, squeezing gently. They remained that way as the transport hurtled toward Morazan, each lost in their own thoughts about the past and the uncertain future that awaited them. The descent through Morazan's atmosphere was turbulent, the transport shields straining against the friction. Varen handled the controls with steady precision, compensating for the craft's uneven weight distribution and damaged stabilizers. They skimmed low over the vast desert, keeping below scanner range, until the jagged peaks of the southern mountain range rose before them. "There," Eli pointed to a narrow canyon, barely visible in the fading light of dusk. We can set down there and contact a friend of mine. Guy named Tarek runs a smuggling operation that might get us off planet. Varen guided the transport into the canyon, settling it gently on a relatively flat stretch of ground between towering rock walls. As the engines powered down, they detected a transmission on the emergency frequency, a general alert to all Imperial forces and registered bounty hunters in the sector. Attention all units. Fugitive Breeder Unit V937 and Experimental Subject M12 have been located in the Morazan system. Full recovery authorized. Standard containment protocols. Substantial reward for intact return. Eli switched off the receiver, his expression grim. They're casting a wide net. Every bounty hunter and Imperial sympathizer in the system will be looking for you. Varen's arms tightened around Mira, who had begun to fuss in the confines of her carrier. How long until your friend can help us? If we're lucky, a day or two. Eli checked his blaster's charge, barely half power remaining. We should conserve resources and stay with the ship until I can make contact. But luck was not on their side. As night fell, the distinctive hum of Imperial drones echoed through the canyon. The bounty hunters had managed to send their coordinates before the escape. We need to move, Eli said urgently, gathering what supplies he could carry, despite the throbbing pain in his shoulder. The canyon opens into a cave system about half a click north. We might lose them in there. They abandoned the ship, slipping into the shadows of the rock walls, just as the first drone appeared overhead, its searchlight sweeping the area in methodical patterns, moving as quietly as possible. They made their way along the canyon floor, freezing whenever the light passed near. Mira, perhaps sensing the danger, remained mercifully quiet, her purple eyes wide as she watched the lights dance across the rock face. Varen kept her close, whispering soothing words in her native language whenever the baby showed signs of distress. They had nearly reached the cave entrance when disaster struck. Eli, weakened by blood loss and distracted by pain, dislodged a small cascade of pebbles that clattered down the canyon wall. The sound, though slight, was enough to draw the attention of the nearest drone. Its searchlight swung toward them, locking on with merciless precision. "Run!" Eli shouted, abandoning stealth for speed. They sprinted the remaining distance to the cave, the drone's alarm sounding behind them. Inside, the darkness was nearly complete, but Eli's scavenger instincts guided them deeper, away from the entrance where Imperial forces would soon converge. The cave system was extensive, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers carved by ancient water flows. Eli led them through narrowing passages, hoping to find a defensible position or, better yet, another exit. His portable light cast eerie shadows on the rock walls, the beam weakening as its power cell depleted. "I think we've lost them for now," he said finally, allowing them to rest in a small chamber where multiple tunnels converged. "But they'll have scanners. It's only a matter of time." Varen sank down against the wall, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Mira had fallen into a fitful sleep, her silver markings pulsing slowly. The sight triggered a memory in Eli's mind. The markings, Varen had said, indicated emotional capacity, something the Empire bred out of their soldiers. An idea began to form. "The Imperial scanners," he said slowly. "They track Mira's neural signature, right? The emotional patterns?" Varen nodded. "It's unique, defective by their standards. What if we could mask it somehow, create interference?" He dug through their meager supplies until he found what he was looking for, his leg-mounted toolkit, a compact array of specialized equipment he used for delicate salvage work. Among the tools was a neural disruptor, designed to safely deactivate security systems that used bioorganic interfaces. "This might work," he muttered, making rapid adjustments to the device. "If I can recalibrate it to emit a field that mimics standard Imperial neural patterns, it might confuse their scanners long enough for us to reach Tarek's outpost." Varen watched him work, hope warring with skepticism in her expression. "Won't they detect the disruptor itself?" Not if I integrate it with something they'd expect to find. Eli removed the Imperial officer's insignia from his pocket. This contains a standard identification chip. If I can wire the disruptor through it. For the next hour, he worked with painstaking precision, the pain in his shoulder forgotten as he focused on the delicate task. When he finally sat back, the modified insignia looked almost identical to its original form, save for a faint blue glow that emanated from the Imperial crest at its center. It's done. Not perfect, but it might buy us some time. He handed the device to Varen. Keep it close to Mira. It should project a field that makes her neural signature appear standardized, like any other Imperial offspring. Varen took the insignia reverently. Your father's last gift to you. Being put to better use than he ever managed. Eli finished with a grim smile. Come on, we should keep moving. They continued through the cave system, now guided by the faint signal from Eli's scanner that indicated surface access. The Imperial drones would have established a perimeter by now, but with the disruptor masking Mira's signature, they might slip through undetected. The tunnel eventually opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a deep ravine. On the far side, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, was a collection of ramshackle structures, Tarek's outpost, built into the cliffside and carefully disguised to avoid aerial detection. There's our destination, Eli said, pointing across the gap. But we'll need to circle around. The bridge is about 1 kilometer south. As they made their way carefully along the ledge, the sound of Imperial transports grew louder. The search had intensified, focused now on the cave system they had just left. The disruptor appeared to be working, at least partially. The drones were confused, their search patterns erratic as they struggled to isolate Mira's unique signature among the standard readings projected by the modified insignia. They had nearly reached the bridge when the ledge narrowed dramatically, forcing them to press against the cliff face to continue. Eli, in the lead, edged forward carefully, testing each foothold before committing his weight. Almost there, he encouraged, reaching back to guide Varen along the treacherous path. But just as safety seemed within reach, the rock beneath Eli's feet gave way. He lurched forward, barely catching himself on a protruding stone as chunks of the ledge tumbled into the ravine below. The gap left behind was small, less than 1 meter, but it might as well have been a chasm given their exhausted state. I'll jump first, he decided, then help you across. Summoning his remaining strength, Eli launched himself over the gap, landing heavily on the other side. Pain shot through his injured shoulder, but he pushed it aside, turning to assist Varen. Come on, he urged, extending his hand across the gap. I've got you. Varen hesitated, looking down at Mira secured against her chest. The jump was risky with the baby. If she slipped. Trust me, Eli said softly. Their eyes met across the divide, purple to brown, alien to human, and in that moment, something passed between them that transcended species and circumstance. Varen took a deep breath, clutched Mira tightly, and jumped. Eli caught her arm, pulling her to safety as more of the ledge crumbled away behind them. For a moment, they stood together on the narrow path, breath coming in ragged gasps, the reality of their near miss sinking in. Then, Mira, jostled by the sudden movement, began to cry, a high, piercing wail that echoed across the ravine. Instantly, the drone activity intensified, searchlights swinging toward the source of the sound. The disruptor, Varen gasped, checking the device. It's damaged! The insignia's blue glow had dimmed. The Imperial crest cracked from the impact of the landing. Without its protection, Mira's unique neural signature was broadcasting clear as a beacon to the Imperial scanners. Run for the bridge, Eli ordered, drawing his blaster. I'll hold them off. No, we stay together. There's no time to argue. Get Mira to Tarek. Tell him Eli sent you and that the debt from Cordova Station is due. He'll know what it means. Varen's expression was anguished, torn between the safety of her child and abandoning Eli. "I can't leave you." "You can and you will." His voice softened. "I'll be right behind you. I promise." It was a lie, and they both knew it, but it was a necessary one. Varen's eyes filled with tears as she recognized the sacrifice he was offering. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his one last time. "May the void hold you gently," she whispered, a blessing in her people's tongue. Then she was gone, running toward the bridge with Mira clutched tightly to her chest. Eli turned to face the approaching drones, his blaster raised despite its depleted charge. He would buy them as much time as he could. The first drone fell easily, its central processor vulnerable to a well-placed shot. The second required 3 attempts, draining his blaster to critical levels. By the time the third appeared, accompanied by the heavy thrum of a Soul Hunter transport, Eli knew his weapon was nearly useless. He looked down at the damaged insignia in his hand, an idea forming. The device was no longer functioning as a neural disruptor, but its power cell was intact. With a few quick adjustments, he could convert it into something far more destructive, a localized EMP that would disable any Imperial tech within a small radius. It would mean sacrificing his father's last memento, and likely damaging his own scanner and remaining tools in the process. But it might create enough chaos to cover Varen's escape. As the Soul Hunter transport hovered overhead, preparing to deploy its troops, Eli made his decision. Working quickly, he reconfigured the insignia's circuitry, overloading its power cell to create a cascading pulse. When the first armored figure rappelled down from the transport, Eli triggered the device and hurled it directly at the Soul Hunter. The explosion was more violent than he'd anticipated. A blinding flash of blue-white energy erupted from the insignia, engulfing the Soul Hunter and radiating outward to disable the remaining drones. The cliff face itself shuddered with the force of the detonation, sending cracks racing through the already unstable ledge. Eli barely had time to register his success before the ground gave way beneath him. He tumbled into the ravine, consciousness fading as the world spun around him. His last thought was of Varen and Mira, racing toward the bridge, toward safety, toward a future he had helped secure, even if he wouldn't be part of it. The darkness claimed him. Pain was his first sensation upon waking, a dull, throbbing ache that seemed to encompass his entire body. Then came awareness of softness beneath him, the smell of medicinal herbs, the sound of quiet breathing nearby. Eli opened his eyes to unfamiliar surroundings. He lay on a simple cot in a small room, carved from the living rock, illuminated by the soft glow of phosphorescent fungi growing along the ceiling. Medical equipment, some Imperial, some cobbled together from various sources, surrounded the bed, monitoring his vital signs. "About time you rejoined the living." The gruff voice belonged to Tarek, who sat in a chair beside the bed. His weathered face creased in what might have been concern or irritation. With Tarek, it was often hard to tell the difference. "How?" Eli's voice was a rasp, his throat dry from disuse. "Your blue friend found you half dead at the bottom of the ravine 3 days ago. Wouldn't leave until we sent a team to recover you." Tarek shook his head in apparent disbelief. "Never thought I'd see the day when Eli Navarro got himself tangled up with an Imperial breeder and her offspring. Varen and Mira, they're safe?" "Safe and waiting for you to wake up. The woman hasn't slept more than an hour at a stretch since we brought you in." Tarek rose, stretching his back with an audible crack. "Dr. Kalin says you've got more broken bones than intact ones, but nothing that won't heal with time and proper care." Relief flooded through Eli, followed immediately by confusion. "Why did you help us? The Imperial bounty is substantial." "Yes." Tarek's expression hardened. "But contrary to popular belief, I do have some principles, and I owed you for Cordova Station." He moved toward the door. "Besides, your friend offered something far more valuable than Imperial credits." Before Eli could ask what he meant, Tarek was gone, replaced in the doorway by a familiar blue figure. Varen rushed to his bedside, her purple eyes bright with unshed tears. "You promised you would be right behind me," she accused, though there was no real anger in her voice, only profound relief. "Technically, I was—" Eli managed a weak smile. "Just took a different route." Varen made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You humans and your literal interpretations." She sat carefully on the edge of the bed, mindful of his injuries. In her arms, Mira cooed and reached toward Eli with tiny six-fingered hands. The infant appeared healthier than he remembered, her silver markings vibrant and active as they pulsed with obvious joy. "Tarek says you offered him something valuable," Eli said. "What did he mean?" "Knowledge," Varen replied. "Of Imperial breeding programs, security protocols, identification codes, everything I was programmed with that might be useful to his operation." A faint smile touched her lips. "It seems the Empire's investment in my education has become their liability." Eli marveled at her resourcefulness. "And he's arranged transport off-planet?" She nodded. "A cargo freighter leaves for the Outer Rim in 2 days. We'll be aboard, all 3 of us, once you're stable enough to travel." The certainty in her voice when she said "all 3 of us" sent a warm current through Eli's chest, more effective than any painkiller. He reached out, ignoring the protest of his injured shoulder, to take her hand. "That moon I mentioned, it's called Alara. Mostly forests and lakes. Quiet." He hesitated, suddenly uncertain. "If that's still where you want to go." Varen's expression softened. "Is it where you want to go?" Eli thought about the life he'd left behind, the solitary existence of a scavenger, living day to day, answering to no one. It had been a life of freedom, in its way, but also of emptiness. What he'd found with Varen and Mira in these few chaotic days was something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. Purpose, connection, the chance to build something that mattered. "Yes," he said simply, "it is." 2 days later, as promised, they boarded a nondescript cargo freighter, bound for the Outer Rim. Tarek had provided them with new identities, basic supplies, and enough credits to establish themselves once they reached their destination. In return, Varen had spent hours downloading everything she knew about Imperial operations into his secure systems. Information that would keep his smuggling network one step ahead of Imperial patrols for years to come. Their quarters on the freighter were cramped, but private. A converted storage room near the engine compartment, where the constant hum of machinery would mask any sounds Mira might make. The journey would take nearly 2 weeks, skirting Imperial checkpoints and major shipping lanes to avoid detection. As they settled in for the long voyage, Eli found himself watching Varen as she created a nest for Mira from their sparse bedding. Despite everything they'd been through, the desperate escapes, the battles, the constant fear of capture, she moved with a grace and purpose that spoke of inner strength he could only admire. "What?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Just thinking about how much has changed. A week ago, I was just a scavenger looking for his next meal ticket. Now I'm on the run with an Imperial fugitive and her emotionally deviant offspring." He smiled to show he was teasing. "It's been an interesting career change." Varen matched his smile with one of her own, an expression she'd been practicing, with increasing success. "Indeed, a week ago, I was property, and Mira was a failed experiment. Now we are—" She trailed off, uncertainty crossing her features. "A family," Eli finished quietly. "If you want to be." The word hung between them, laden with meaning and possibility. Varen's purple eyes searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation or doubt. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Yes, a family." The journey passed without incident, the freighter captain holding to her end of the arrangement with professional discretion. They spent the time learning about each other, Eli sharing stories of his childhood on Morazan before the Water Wars, Varen, cautiously exploring memories of her early years that had been suppressed, but not fully erased by Imperial conditioning. Mira flourished in the peaceful environment, her neural pathways strengthening daily without the need for artificial support. She began to vocalize more, making sounds that Varen recognized as the beginnings of language. Her silver markings became increasingly complex, reflecting the rich emotional development that the Empire had tried so hard to prevent. When they finally arrived at Alara, the sight of the moon through the viewport took Eli's breath away. It was even more beautiful than he remembered, a sphere of deep blues and vibrant greens, with clouds swirling across its surface like brushstrokes of white. Far from the central systems, it had been deemed too resource-poor to warrant Imperial attention after its initial terraforming, leaving it largely untouched for centuries. The freighter captain dropped them at a small trading post on the northern continent, the only settlement of any size on the moon. From there, they purchased a used ground transport and supplies, then set out for the coordinates Eli had memorized years before, a valley nestled between ancient forests, with a lake of startling clarity at its center. It took 3 days to reach their destination, the journey slowed by rough terrain and the need to navigate without official maps. But when they finally crested the ridge that overlooked the valley, the exhaustion of travel fell away, replaced by a sense of wonder. Below them stretched a paradise of sorts, verdant meadows bordered by towering trees whose leaves shimmered with iridescent hues, the lake reflecting the pink-tinged clouds of early evening. At the valley's edge stood the ruins of what had once been a terraforming station, its basic structure intact despite centuries of neglect. "Home," Eli said, the word feeling right on his tongue. They established themselves in the old station, working together to clear debris and repair essential systems. The building's solar collectors still functioned, providing basic power for their needs. The surrounding forest and lake offered abundant food sources, and the fertile soil of the valley floor proved ideal for the gardens Varen began to plant. Eli focused on rebuilding old prospecting equipment he found in the station's storage bays, modifying it to help them locate water sources, minerals, and other resources they might need. His scavenger's skills proved invaluable as they transformed the abandoned outpost into a comfortable dwelling. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months. They established routines, divided tasks according to their strengths, and slowly built a life together in their isolated paradise. Imperial patrols never came near their remote moon, and the few traders who occasionally visited the planet showed no interest in their quiet valley. Mira grew quickly, as alien children apparently did, soon taking her first steps across the station's main room, her delighted giggles echoing off the metal walls. She learned words from both Eli's language and Varen's native tongue, creating a unique hybrid dialect that became the family's private language. One evening, as the twin moons of Alara rose over the lake, Eli and Varen sat on the repaired roof of the station, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Mira had been put to bed after a day spent chasing the bioluminescent insects that inhabited the forest edge. "Do you ever regret it?" Varen asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Leaving everything behind?" Eli considered the question, his gaze tracing the constellations that were becoming familiar in their new home sky. "What did I really leave behind? A life of scraping by, always looking over my shoulder, never trusting anyone?" He shook his head. "No, I don't regret it." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers, in what had become a familiar gesture of affection. "What about you? You had a purpose in the Empire, even if it wasn't one you chose." "A purpose is not a life," Varen said softly. "I was designed to produce soldiers who would never know joy or sorrow or love, who would never truly live, only exist." She looked toward the window where Mira's room lay. "Now, I raise a daughter who feels everything, who will choose her own path." Her purple eyes met his. and I have found emotions in myself that I never knew existed. Eli felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with his still healing injuries. Like what? Varen hesitated, searching for the right words. Like belonging, security, trust. She paused, then added with quiet certainty, love. The words settled between them, both a revelation and a confirmation of what had been growing since that first desperate moment in the tunnels beneath Morazan. I never expected this, Eli admitted. When I heard Mira crying in those tunnels, I was just going to walk away, keep to myself, mind my own business. The smart move, the safe move. Why didn't you? He had asked himself that question many times over the past months. Why had he stopped? Why had he helped? Why had he given up everything for two strangers who should have meant nothing to him? Because sometimes the right thing and the smart thing aren't the same, he said finally. And I guess, deep down, I wanted to be the kind of person who chooses right over smart. He squeezed her hand. Best decision I ever made. Varen leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the moons rise higher in the night sky. Below them, in the room, she had decorated with colorful stones and flowers from the valley. Mira slept peacefully, her silver markings pulsing gently with dreams no imperial scientist would ever study or quantify. They had begun as a desperate bargain. Save my baby, human, and I'll be yours forever. Words spoken from fear and desperation by a woman who believed her body was the only currency she possessed. But here, in this quiet moment under alien stars, Eli understood that what they had built together was something far more precious than any transaction could encompass. It was a family, forged not from obligation or design, but from choice, from love, from the simple, revolutionary act of seeing value in what the Empire had deemed worthless: emotions, imperfections, connections that could not be quantified or controlled. And in a galaxy ruled by an empire that sought to eliminate such defects, that might be the most radical act of all. Forever is a long time, Eli murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to Varen's forehead. She smiled up at him, her purple eyes reflecting the moonlight. Then it's fortunate we've only just begun.